Welcome to Reading the Bible Together for Genesis chapter 18, one of the big moments in the life of Abraham and Sarah. Now, the reading begins with Abraham in his encampment in Mamre, sitting in the shade to escape the heat of the sun. Three visitors suddenly appear. Now, we're told it is the Lord, literally, the Lord that is Yahweh. But to Abraham, the identity is not revealed. Startled from his afternoon doze, Abraham hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by." Note that in using the title, "My Lord," Abraham is not necessarily regarding this as a divine visitation. He's merely using the formal language of greeting and respect common in that Middle East culture. Abraham continues. He says, "Let a little water be brought, then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat so you can be refreshed and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant." "Very well," they answered, "do as you say." Now, a puzzling part of this interchange is the way in which the visitors move back and forth from the singular to the plural in how they're described and how they're addressed by Abraham. Are there three? Is there one? Now, park that thought in your head for a moment. We'll come back to it. But first, back to our story. Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. "Quick," he said, "get 3 large measures of the finest flour and knead it and bake some bread." Then he ran to the herd and selected a choice tender calf and gave it to a servant who hurried to prepare it. Note the urgency in this passage. Abraham hurries and then runs, and the cook hurries to prepare the meal. He wishes to show great hospitality, but not to delay or inconvenience his guests. And then this. He then brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared, and he set these before them. While they ate, he stood near them under a tree. Now, that's a couple of more interesting things. He serves meat and dairy together. Abraham, the father of the Hebrew nation, is serving a non-kosher meal. No observant Jew today would dream of eating this meal. In fact, the Jewish dietary laws expressly forbid it. To this day, if you go to a McDonald's restaurant in Israel or at the airport, Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv, you can't order a hamburger and a milkshake together. In fact, the restaurant is split into 2 sides. One for meat, one for dairy. But those laws will not be enacted until the time of Moses, many hundreds of years later. The fact that we're told that Abraham serves meat with dairy tells us it's a very, very old story. Now, note the amazing generosity of Abraham. The finest flour, a choice tender calf, the freshest curds. While this may seem excessively generous to us, Abraham doesn't even know these guys. I have been the recipient of equal measures of traditional Middle Eastern generosity and hospitality. In Jerusalem in 2005, I, together with my friend Rick Fee, the then moderator of the General Assembly, were invited to a meal by the director of the Refugee Services for the Middle East Council of Churches. It turned out to be his wife's birthday meal. There were a dozen or more guests, all immediate family, save Rick and myself. And it was one of the great meals of my life, extending well into the early morning hours. Rick and I barely managed to stagger to our taxi, filled to overflowing with incredible hospitality, food, and arak. Well, back to our story again. Notice too how Abraham, the perfect attentive host, stands under a tree rather than joining the guests in case there's something else they may need. Just this past year, a dear Lebanese friend had a group of us over to her home for a superb meal. Trying to get her to sit down and eat with us rather than hover over us, attentive to our every need, was next to impossible. There are Abrahams among us to this day, and Sarah's. And it's Sarah's turn in the story now. "Where's your wife Sarah?" the visitors ask him. "There in the tent," he said. Then one of them said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." We keep reading. Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I'm worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure? Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have a child now that I'm old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, I did not laugh. But he said, yes, you did. By now, Abraham must realize these are no ordinary visitors. They, or as the text says, one of them repeats the promise of God that Sarah will bear a son. Now, Sarah, not surprisingly, laughs to herself. After I'm worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have pleasure? She doubts both Abraham and her own abilities. But the visitor, now identified again as the Lord, again Yahweh, seems to upbraid Sarah for expressing doubt. The promise is repeated, and Sarah, caught out, denies having laughed. After all, it was just to herself. But the Lord knows the inner and outer words and thoughts. Yes, you did laugh. Now, you might remember that Abraham in the last chapter had a good laugh too, but he's not spoken to about it. The ancient Jewish commentator Rashi tells us this is because Abraham's laughter was one of rejoicing, while Sarah's was one of doubtful scorn. And who am I to correct the great Rashi? Now, I asked you to keep the three visitors, one visitor dynamic in mind. The Orthodox Church Fathers saw this passage as a clear presentation of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, yet together still one God. There's a famous and beautiful icon by Andrei Rublev, which is written, you don't paint an icon, you write an icon. It was written about 600 years ago. It describes the three visitors gathered around a table. They are winged and have halos. They differ in their clothing, but the faces and hair are identical. Their table is triangular. There is much symbolism in the icon, far more than we can address here. Breathtakingly beautiful, this icon expresses what words cannot, and perhaps what this story presages, the understanding of the triune God. Look it up on your computer. Do a research on Rublev, R-U-B-L-E-V, Rublev Trinity icon, and you'll have it. Unfortunately, as is so often the case in Genesis, the sublime is immediately followed by the sad. The visitors rise to leave and they look in the direction of Sodom. Strangely, even as the Lord perceived Sarah's inner thoughts, now we are told of the Lord's inner voice, inner dialogue. Should Abraham be told of the plans for Sodom, or shall Abraham be given a chance to demonstrate his righteousness in his response? Then the Lord said to Abraham, we read, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin so grievous that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know. Now, Abraham, upon receiving this news, astonishingly enters into negotiations with the Lord. Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of all the earth do right? Now, there are uncomfortable parallels here with the story of the great flood, where just a few are saved and the rest perish due to wickedness. And now Abraham appeals to God's justice in brave language, demonstrating his own righteousness and justice while challenging that of God. In doing so, Abraham passes yet another test. The Lord agrees to spare the whole place for the sake of 50. Well, Abraham's not done. He continues the negotiation. 45, 40, 30, 20, 10. What if there's 10, Lord? The Lord mercifully agrees. For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. But will 10 be found? Find out next time in chapter 19 as we read the Bible together. And we'll see you then.